Hello, everybody. Welcome to your second guided reading recording. We're going to be, again, focusing on that first kind of pages, 1 to 75, but really more towards 32 to 75. All right, so the first thing I want you to do while you get ready for this guided reading is I want you to open your checkpoint assignment. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to get that all open, and we will get started today. Okay, at this time, you want to make sure you have your checkpoint open and you're focusing with the guided reading, following along with me. So remember, guided reading, we're going to read, stop, lots of stop, reading, and thinking. So the expectation is that you're following along with me. All right, here we go. Today, our reading focus are these standards. We're going to look at characterization, and we're also going to look how the author unfolds ideas, events, especially with history. We're going to see how the historical events of World War II starts to catch up with Anne. We are going to be looking at 7 different entries today. Some of them are excerpts, some of them are full entries. We're going to be looking at the persecution of Jews getting worse. Otto, Anne's father, is sick, and Anne has still a conflict with Mrs. Van Daan. British success in the war is starting to happen. There's a change in Anne's relationship with her mother. Anne gets a new roommate, Mr. Dussel, in the annex. Mr. Dussel, the new roommate, starts to have horrifying tales of the outside world since he's been outside longer than Anne and their family. Anne, you get to see her relationship with nature, and the war worsens in Holland and throughout Europe. So we're going to see all of this. All right, so every time we have an excerpt, we're going to actually look at the vocab that we're going to see in that excerpt. So when we read, I want you to look for the blue highlight. Those are all the words that you see here. So what we did is we broke them down into roots. Sometimes they're not broken down because sometimes the word's not an English word and you can't really break it down. It might not be Latin-based. But looking at our first vocab word, dismal. Dismal is an adjective, so it's a describing word. Dismal means depressing and dreary, just like this picture here, kind of a very depressing picture. This is a prefix that means away. Mal is a root, which means bad. So then prefix is the beginning of the word, root is that center core of the word. So bad, feeling kind of away, depressed, and not feeling good. Our next word is Gestapo. Gestapo is a noun because it is a group of people. Remember, nouns are people, places, things. This is actually the secret police that the Nazis used, so kind of the enemy to Anne and her family. So note, this is a German word. If you break down the word Gesta, means deeds. That's the root, so that's the core of the word, and the suffix, the end of that word, apo, means separation. So separation of deeds, kind of interesting here what these words mean. Our next one is lamentations. This is also a noun, it's a thing. And this is an expression of sorrow or sadness. So if we look at the root, lament, the core of the word, one who laments, so that just means one who kind of cries, gets upset. And ation is a process. That's the suffix, the ending of the word. That's the process of lamenting. Easy peasy. We can see here. Saboteurs is a noun. It's people, a person who sabotages or betrays. So sa, the prefix, is togetherness. Bator, the root, the core of the word, is working slower. So kind of working against the grain, kind of being a traitor is what a saboteur is. All right, we are ready to get started our first entry today. Follow along with me. You are more than welcome to read aloud with me as well for extra fluency practice. Friday, October 9th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, today I have nothing but dismal and depressing news to report. Our many Jewish friends and acquaintances are being taken away in droves. The Gestapo is treating them very roughly and transporting them in cattle cars to Westerbork, the big camp in Drenthe, to which they are sending all the Jews. Miep told us about someone who'd managed to escape from there. It must be terrible in Westerbork. The people get almost nothing to eat, much less to drink, as water is available only 1 hour a day. And there's only one toilet and sink for several thousand people. Men and women sleep in the same room, and women and children often have their heads shaved. escape is almost impossible. Many people look Jewish and they're branded by their shorn heads. If it's that bad in Holland, what must it be like in those faraway and uncivilized places where the Germans are sending them? We assume that most of them are being murdered. The English radio says they're being gassed. Perhaps that's the quickest way to die. I feel terrible. Miep's accounts of these horrors are so heartrending, and Miep is also very distraught. The other day, for instance, the Gestapo deposited an elderly, crippled Jewish woman on Miep's doorstep while they set off to find a car. The old woman was terrified of the glaring searchlights and the guns firing at the English planes overhead. Yet, Miep didn't dare let her in. Nobody would. The Germans are generous enough when it comes to punishment. Piep is also very subdued. Her boyfriend is being sent to Germany. Every time the planes fly over, she's afraid they're going to drop their entire bomb load on Bertus' head. Jokes like, "Oh, don't worry, they can't all fall on him," or "one bomb is all it takes," are hardly appropriate in this situation. Bertus is not the only one being forced to work in Germany. Trainloads of young men depart daily. Some of them try to sneak off the train when it stops at a small station, but only a few manage to escape unnoticed and find a place to hide. But that's not the end of my lamentations. Have you ever heard the term hostages? That's the latest punishment for saboteurs. It's the most horrible thing you can imagine. Leading citizens, innocent people, are to taken prisoner to await their execution. If the Gestapo can't find the saboteur, they'll simply grab 5 hostages and line them up against the wall. You read the announcement of their death in the paper where they're referred to as fatal accidents. Fine specimens of humanity, those Germans, and to think I'm actually one of them. No, that's not true. Hitler took away our nationality long ago. And besides, there are no greater enemies on earth than the Germans and the Jews. Yours, Anne. All right, notice here anything highlighted in this pinkish color, you're going to use context clues to figure out. So what I mean by context clues, you need to use what I highlighted, the supporting text that's going to help you figure it out, right? So the word droves, if you're not sure what that word means, I highlighted this to kind of support you, to help you. Transporting them in cattle cars, right? Treating them as if they're a bunch of cows, transporting them. So you'll see that again with heartrending, right? So heartrending and distraught. And you'll see our vocab words, dismal, Gestapo, lamentation, saboteur. Remember, dismal's depressing, Gestapo's the Nazi secret police. Lamentations are kind of just process of being sorrow or sad. Saboteur is a traitor. Okay, so just remember and look out for these pink little context clue highlights. All right, so let's zoom in a little bit. I took out one piece of this excerpt here that I want to focus on. Men and women sleep in the same room, and women and children often have their heads shaved. Escape is almost impossible. Many people look Jewish, and they're branded by their shorn heads. So that's what you can kind of visualize here as a picture. They're shorn heads of these shaven heads. And the reason why these prisoners had shaved heads is to eliminate the spreading of lice. So lice is when you have your bugs in your hair, and that happens a lot in these kind of conditions where they're not being taken care of. So this just shows how terrifying, how really disastrous and terrible these conditions were at the concentration camps, how they're being treated. I really want you to realize that this is not any joke. This is something very serious. All right, so open up your checkpoint assignment. We're going to complete the first checkpoint of the day. So just looking at this passage here, I'll reread. Find specimens of humanity, those Germans, and to think I'm actually one of them. No, that's not true. Hitler took away our nationality long ago. And besides, there are no greater enemies on earth than the Germans and the Jews. Okay, so for checkpoint question number 1, I want you to answer this question using multiple choice options. How does Anne feel about the Germans under Hitler's rule? Is it A, she believes they are a country full of fine specimens? B, she blames Hitler for the loss of her nationality as a Jew? Or is it C, she believes Germany's enemy is France? So take your time now to make your response. I'll give you about 1 minute, and we'll continue. Okay, go to the next slide. If you need more time, just feel free to pause this recording. You can play if you need more time to think. All right, on to the next one. So this is our second excerpt we're going to read, and we're going to break down some vocabulary we're going to see. So again, when we read, look for that blue highlighting. The first word we're going to look at is measles. Measles is a noun, it's a thing. It's a disease that causes fever and a red rash. It kind of has little red bumps on you. Perspire is a verb. It's an action word, so it means to sweat, right? So per is your prefix. It means very. Spire is our root word, the core word. It means breath or spirit, so kind of like to be very like, just your spirit is almost leaking out of you. That's what I like to think about. If you see this picture here, his spirit is kind of leaking out of him. China, this is a noun, not the place, but the thing. These are fine dishes and tableware. You might see this at home. They might be in a china closet, something like that, where you keep really nice dishes. Usually when you get married, that's one of the things you pick out for a traditional wedding. All right, so just look for these words in blue. Okay, I'm going to read our next entry, but remember, look at your pink highlighting. If you're not sure, I give you a little bit of support there so you don't get stuck. So feel free to read aloud with me or follow along in your head. All right. Thursday, October 29th, 1942. My dearest Kitty, I'm very worried. Father's sick. He's covered with spots and he's a high temperature. It looks like measles. Just think, we can't even call a doctor. Mother is making him perspire in hopes of sweating out the fever. This morning, Meek told us that the furniture has been removed from the Van Dan's apartment on Zuider Amstelan. We haven't told Mrs. Van D yet. She's been so nervös. So that just kind of is a Dutch word for kind of worried or just troublesome. Lately, and we don't feel like hearing her moan and groan again about all the beautiful china and lovely chairs she had to leave behind. We had to abandon most of our nice things too. What's the good of grumbling about it now? Father wants me to start reading books by Hebel and other well-known German writers. I can read German fairly well by now, except that I usually mumble the words instead of reading them silently to myself. But that'll pass. Father has taken the plays of Goethe and Schiller down to the big bookcase and is planning to read to me every evening. We started off with Don Carlos, encouraged by Father's good example. Mother pressed her prayer book into my hands. I read a few prayers in German, just to be polite. They certainly sound beautiful, but they mean very little to me. What's this making me act so religious and devout? Tomorrow we're going to light the stove for the first time. The chimney hasn't been swept in ages, so the room is bound to be filled with smoke. I took the thing draws. Yours, Anne. Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit. I want you to read this part aloud with me for fluency practice. So fluency, I know you're probably thinking that's a first grade thing to do. Nope, fluency you need to read aloud at older ages as well. Just because guess what? If you can practice reading aloud and you can go quicker, that means your mind is comprehending the information quicker. So fluency is a great practice for you understanding what you're reading. So ready? Read with me. This morning, Meek told us that the furniture has been removed from the Van Dan's apartment on Zuider Amstelan. We haven't told Mrs. Van D yet. She's been so nervous and mild lately, and we don't feel like hearing her moan and groan again about all the beautiful china and lovely chairs she had to leave behind. We had to abandon most of our nice things too. What's the good of grumbling about it now? If you followed along with me, but your tone didn't sound like my tone, I want you to do this again, because you need to pay attention to punctuation. Periods, you need to stop, take a pause, commas as well. Stop, take a pause. Also, this question mark, you need to have an inflecting tone. What that means is listen to how my voice kind of raises at the end here. What's the good of grumbling about it now? Right, so I said now. That means you just asked the question. So take a little minute and read this again. Okay. So let's move on to your second checkpoint here. Still looking at this passage, let's open your checkpoint assignment. We're going to answer this question. True or false? Mrs. Van Daan cares more about material things than Anne, which adds to their tension, right? So Mrs. Van Daan and Anne do not get along very well. If you think that this statement is true, I want you to put A or B. So giving you just a couple of seconds to make up your mind. Okay, and on to the next one. All right, so there's no vocabulary breakdown because I am pretty sure you know most of these words here. If not, just open up a Google page and just search if you're unsure of certain words. Okay. Thursday, November 5th, 1942. Feel free to read aloud with me if you want fluency practice or in your head, either way. Dear Kitty, the British have finally scored a few successes in Africa, and Stalingrad hasn't fallen yet. So the men are happy and we had coffee and tea this morning. For the rest, nothing special to report. This week I've been reading a lot and doing little work. That's the way things ought to be. That's surely the road to success. Mother and I are getting along better lately, but we're never close. Father's not very open about his feelings, but he's the same sweetheart he's always been. We lit the stove a few days ago and the entire room is still filled with smoke. I prefer central heating, and I'm probably not the only one. Margot's a stinker. There's no other word for it. A constant source of irritation morning, noon, and night. And Frank. Okay, so I kind of want to focus on this top here because I want to make sure you know what's going on in World War II. So there was actually a front in Africa, if you did not know, in World War II. If you ever saw Lawrence of Arabia, that movie talks about that a lot. So a lot of people don't know that. And Stalingrad, that is in Russia, so this is the Russian standpoint. But we're going to really focus on the African because I want to make sure that you know what this is. So I am going to put this link in the chat just in case I can't web tour for you. Feel free to open it up. If not, I'm going to web tour this link, and we're just going to watch a quick video. What they're talking about here was actually called Operation Torch. This is basically the invasion of Africa by British and American soldiers. So this is a big deal because the Germans originally had this point. So British is now, the success they're talking about here is the invasion of Africa and taking over. All right, so let's web tour that just so you can actually see what we're talking about here. Okay, so I know that he kind of talked a little bit fast, so if you wanted to check out that video again, please feel free to click it open. Basically what he said, Africa is controlled by Italy. Italy is an Axis. Okay, so let's just break down World War II real quick. Axis powers is Germany, Italy, Japan, right? Those are the ones putting the Jews into concentration camps, mostly Germany, but those are the ones that support Germany's view, okay? So that's Anne's enemy. The Allies are British, us, the Americans, and Russians. Those are the main ones, France as well. The Allies were against Germany, against the concentration camps, all that. So basically what Operation Torch is when the Allies, us Americans, and the British take over the Axis powers, right? Takes over the Italy front in Africa. So a huge deal. This is a huge deal. So it's a good thing, right? That's why the men are happy. All right, so just make sure you know what's going on historically because it does affect your comprehension of the book. All right. So let's zoom in a little bit. I really want to focus on this relationship between Anne and her family members. So let's look here. I'm going to read again. Feel free to read aloud with me. Mother and I are getting along better lately, but we're never close. Father's not very open about his feelings, but he's the same sweetheart he's always been. We lit the stove a few days ago, and the entire room is still filled with smoke. I prefer central heating, and I'm probably not the only one. Margot's a stinker. There's no other word for it. A constant source of irritation, morning, noon, and night. And Frank. Okay, so open up your checkpoint assignment. We're going to do our third question, our third checkpoint. Our question here is, which sentence, right, in this whole entire passage, which sentence best represents a change in Anne's opinion about one of her family members, right? So which sentence shows a change in opinion? Is it A, but we're never close? Is it B, Margot's a stinker? Or is it C, Mother and I are getting along better lately? I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to make your option and put in your answer. Okay, if you need more time, just press pause. You can do that. I'm going to go to the next one. All right, for our next excerpt, we're going to break down some vocabulary. The first thing you're going to see is actually not a word, but it's a phrase. It's called an idiom. Idioms are kind of silly phrases that don't mean exactly what they say. For example, I had butterflies in my stomach. You don't actually have butterflies in your stomach, but it means you're nervous, right? Good nervous. He has the cat got your tongue, right? A cat does not literally have your tongue, but you not talking is an expression. So these are called idioms. And the first idiom we see here is called sound out. This is a way of expressing that feels one personality. Get a clear picture of a person, right? You might hear also feel out, like let me get a feel for them, or let me get a feel of this. You're just basically trying to figure out personality of someone. So that's going to be an expression you're going to see highlighted in blue. Your next one is superficial. This is a word, and it's an adjective. It's a describing word. This means it seems to be real into further examining, right? So on the top, the surface, everything looks good. But if you look underneath it, maybe it's not even there, or it's kind of like fake. I always like to think of it as almost fake. So breaking down of the affixes and roots, super is our prefix. It means over. Official is our root, which means face. So kind of like you're not really sure if they're the right kind of person. It's just their face. It's just surface. So I put this here. Shoes make me happy. I'm superficial. Whatever, right? So people that really constantly focus on materialism, they're also called superficial because they're more worried about the surface than what's on the inside of you. Our next word is acquaintance. This is a noun because it's a person. This is someone you know but is not a close friend, right? So if you look here, these two people are kind of like at an interview, right? That's an acquaintance. People like family, friends, you don't really know, but you know of them, or maybe a friend of a friend. Those are acquaintances. So if we break it down, ac, our prefix, means to. Quaint, our root, which is our core word, means modest. And ant, our suffix, the end of the word, is called state. So a state of kind of being modestly friends, right? Connected in a modest way. That's what I like to think about. All right, so look for those words and expressions in blue. All right, again, follow along in your head or aloud with me. Tuesday, November 10th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, great news. We're planning to take an 8th person into hiding with us. Yes, really. We always thought there was enough room and food for one more person, but we were afraid of placing an even greater burden on Mr. Kugler and Mr. Kleiman. But since reports of the dreadful things being done to the Jews are getting worse by the day, Father decided to sound out these two gentlemen. So I don't have it highlighted here, but here's sound out. That's our idiom. And they thought it was an excellent plan. It's just as dangerous whether there are 7 or 8, they noted rightly. Once this was settled, we sat down and mentally went through our circle of acquaintances, trying to come up with a single person who would blend in well with our extended family. This wasn't difficult. After Father had rejected all the Von Down relatives, we chose a dentist named Albert Dussel. He lives with a charming Christian lady who's quite a bit younger than he is. They're probably not married, but that's beside the point. He is known to be quiet and refined, and he seemed, from our superficial acquaintance with him, to be nice. Meep knows him as well, so she'll be able to make the necessary arrangements. If he comes, Mr. Dussel will have to sleep in my room instead of Margot, who will have to make do with the folding bed. We'll ask him to bring along something to fill cavities with. Yours, Anne. So remember, look for that pink to add those context clues. All right. Let's zoom in here. I want to just focus on this passage here. So I want you kind of to visualize in your head. So kind of, you can close your eyes if you want me to read. And I want you to visualize, what do you feel like Mr. Dussel looks like? What do you feel like he looks like? What do you feel like he's like as a person? So close your eyes if you want and listen. After Father had rejected all the Van Daan relatives, we chose a dentist named Albert Dussel. He lives with a charming Christian lady who's quite a bit younger than he is. They're probably not married, but that's beside the point. He's known to be quiet and refined, and he seemed, from our superficial acquaintance with him, to be nice. Meep knows him as well, so she'll be able to make the necessary arrangements. If he comes, Mr. Dussel will have to sleep in my room instead of Margot. We'll have to make do with the folding bed. We'll ask him to bring along something to fill cavities with. Okay, so what is he like in your mind? Right? I wanted you probably pictured a quiet, refined man. So kind of quiet, nothing obnoxious about him. He's a dentist, so kind of just think about, what is a dentist like? They do kind of usually seem to be very similar, dentist people. He's a Christian. He's not a Christian. He lives with a Christian woman, right? So you can kind of figure out what kind of person he is. He's obviously open to other people if he's Jewish and he's married to a Christian woman, right? So open. He's not a traditional Jew. Just quiet, refined, and just he seems nice, right? So that's the kind of picture I'm getting from him. Also, I want you to think, do you think Anne and him will get along as roommates? Thinking about who he is, how quiet and refined he is, and Anne is kind of very sassy, likes to be honest, almost brutally honest. Do you think they'll get along? Just think about that. You don't know. Make a little prediction in your mind. Okay, on to the next one. For our next excerpt, we're going to be looking at this vocabulary, clutches. This is a noun, because this is not a noun, it's a verb. Excuse me, I apologize. This is a verb. I want to write that on the board so you can see. Sorry about that. This is a verb because it's an action, and that means to tight grasp, right? So ladies, you might know you have a clutch as a purse, but when you have a clutch, you really have a tight grasp on that purse. Haul is a verb which means to pull or drag with force. So I always think of U-Hauls, right? If you put a U-Haul in the back of your car, if you rent a U-Haul, you're dragging bigger things that you can't carry. Bounty is a noun because it's a thing. It means like treasure or abundance of something. Okay, so we're going to be looking at those words. So look for the blue highlight. And again, look for the pink for context clues. All right, again, in your head or aloud with me. Thursday, November 19th, 1942. Mr. Dussel has told us much about the outside world we've missed for so long. He had sad news. Countless friends and acquaintances have been taken off to a dreadful fate. Night after night, green and gray military vehicles cruise the streets. They knock on every door asking whether any Jews live there. If so, the whole family is immediately taken away. If not, they proceed to the next house. It's impossible to escape their clutches unless you go into hiding. They often go around with lists, knocking only on those doors where they know there's a big haul to be made. They frequently offer a bounty, so much per head. It's like the slave hunts of the olden days. I don't mean to make light of this. It's much too tragic for that. In the evening when it's dark, I often see long lines of good, innocent people, accompanied by crying children, walking on, ordered about by a handful of men who bully and beat them until they nearly drop. No one is spared. The sick, the elderly, children, babies, and pregnant women, all are marched to their death. We're so fortunate here, away from the turmoil. We wouldn't have to give a moment's thought to all the suffering if it weren't for the fact that we're so worried about those we hold dear, whom we can no longer help. I feel wicked sleeping in a warm bed, while somewhere out there my dearest friends are dropping from exhaustion or being knocked to the ground. I get frightened myself when I think of close friends who are now at the mercy of the cruelest monsters ever to stalk the earth. And all because of Jews. Yours, Anne. So I'm just going to stop. This is a really, really upsetting entry. And you can see how upset she is. Right? She feels almost guilty that she's in hiding while everybody else is being taken. But I mean, it's just survival right now. All right, just kick that in for a second. All right, let's zoom in. I want you to make a connection here because this is important. Let's look at this passage. We're so fortunate here. away from the turmoil. So turmoil means like just disaster, right? The war. We wouldn't have to give a moment's thought to all the suffering if it weren't for the fact that we're so worried about those we hold dear, and we can no longer help. I feel wicked sleeping in a warm bed, while somewhere out there my dearest friends are dropping from exhaustion or being knocked to the ground. I get frightened myself when I think of close friends who are now at the mercy of the cruelest monsters ever to stalk the earth, and all because they're Jews. Okay, very powerful passage. So I want you to notice how Anne feels extremely grateful to be in hiding, though the world around her is crumbling, right, because of the war. How would you feel if you're Anne? Would you feel guilty like she does, grateful like she does? Would you feel like, oh, I'm good? How would you feel? Just in your head, answer that question. How would you feel? Make that connection. It's always good to make connections to a text. Put you inside the text instead of just reading it, but you're interacting when you're making connections. Next one. So we're going to look at this vocab words for our next excerpt. So we have prospect, which is a noun because it's a thing. It's the likelihood of an event in the future, right? So pros, the prefix means forward. Spect means to see. That's the root, right? To see into the future almost. Calisthenics, this is a noun. It's basically exercise that you do in gym class. Any exercise without weights like jumping jacks, sit-ups, things like that. It's also a noun. Binoculars, this is a noun as well because it's a thing. It's a tool to see in the distance, right? If you want to do bird watching, things like that. So breaking down this word, bi means to, that prefix. Noc, the root, means virtue. And ular means resemble. So just to see the resemblance of a virtue. So kind of just to see far away. Next one. Again, in your head or aloud with me. Saturday, November 28, 1942. Dearest Kitty, we've been using too much electricity and have now exceeded our ration. The result, excessive economy and the prospect of having the electricity cut off. No light for 14 days. That's a pleasant thought, isn't it? But who knows? Maybe it won't be so long. It's too dark to read after 4 or 4:30. So we while away time with those kinds of crazy activities. Telling riddles, doing calisthenics in the dark, speaking English or French, reviewing books. After a while, everything gets boring. Yesterday, I discovered a new pastime, using a good pair of binoculars to peek into the lighted rooms of the neighbors. During the day, our curtains can't be open, not even an inch. But there's no harm when it's so dark. I never knew that neighbors could be so interesting. Ours are at any rate. I've come across a few at dinner, one family making home movies, and the dentist across the way working on a frightened old lady. Okay, so let's zoom in on a couple parts here. You notice you have a checkpoint. So open up that checkpoint as I read this passage. No light for 14 days. That's a pleasant thought, isn't it? But who knows? Maybe it won't be so long. It's too dark to read after 4 or 4:30. So we while away the time with all kinds of crazy activities. Telling riddles, doing calisthenics in the dark, speaking English or French, reviewing books. After a while, everything gets boring. Yesterday, I discovered a new pastime, using a good pair of binoculars to peek into the lighted rooms of the neighbors. During the day, our curtains can't be open, not even an inch, but there's no harm when it's so dark. Okay, so for your checkpoint number 4, we're going to look at this. Let's look at this statement. So nature, right? Nature, the world around her atmosphere, is continually affecting Anne while she's in the annex, right? She's always kind of commenting on the weather outside, what it's like, is it dreary or not. According to this passage, though, that you see here, the lack of blank is having a negative effect on her mood, which is making her feel bored. So what part of nature is affecting her mood to make it feel negative? But with her doing the binoculars, she's still trying to keep it positive. That's going to be a theme you'll see here. As negative as Anne gets, she's just always a positive with her. Is this blank lack of A, sleep, B, light, or C, food? I'll give you a couple of seconds to make your choice in that checkpoint assignment. Okay, on to the next one. Just pause if I'm going too quickly. Alrighty, and for our last vocab, our last excerpt, this is our vocab here. Gnawing is a verb. it's an action word. It's a continual chewing. So if you have a dog, they kind of gnaw at a bone or a stick. Pang is a noun, it's a thing. It's a sharp, painful emotion, right? So maybe whenever something really terrible happens, maybe you found out a loved one died or a close friend died, you feel like a pang of pain. It's not, it feels like it's actually physically there, but it's kind of the way your emotions are, that it feels like it's a physical pain. Our last word here, hordes, is a noun because it's a thing. This is just basically a large group of people, right, if you see here. All right, so look for them in the blue highlighting. Again, follow along in your head or aloud with me. Wednesday, January 13th, 1943. The children in this neighborhood run around in thin shirts and wooden shoes. They have no coats, no socks, no caps, and no one to help them. Gnawing on a carrot to still their hunger pangs, they walk from their cold houses through cold streets to an even colder classroom. Things have gotten so bad in Holland that hordes of children stop passerby in the streets to beg for a piece of bread. I could spend hours telling you about the suffering the war has brought, but I'd only make myself more miserable. All we can do is wait, as calmly as possible, for the end. Jews and Christians alike are waiting. The whole world is waiting, and many are waiting for death. Another really upsetting passage here. So I want you to stop and make an inference. Remember, inferring is a really important part of the reading process. This is basically when you read between the lines. You take what you read, so you take what you read in this passage, and what you already know in your mind, what your experiences have been in your life, and you make an inference. It's almost like an assumption. Let's answer this question. Where are the children's parents? Why are these children begging for food, right? Where are their parents? Why are they just by themselves? Why are there so many of them, right? There's hordes of children. Why are there so many children by themselves begging for food? Think about that. Make an inference. All right, and when I made an inference, I took what I read, right? There's hordes of food. They're hungry, right? I'm taking what I've read, the text. They're hungry. They're gnawing on carrots, right? Like they're really starving. It's cold. They're begging. What I think is maybe their parents got taken away and they were left behind. This happens a lot in war. If you think about what's going on now with ISIS and the refugees, a lot of those refugees are children because their parents have died or got taken prisoner, okay? So this happens a lot with war. Sometimes children are just left behind, and that's why there's so many of them. Just like what was happening now with the refugees. Lots of them are children. All right, so I want to zoom in again for our final checkpoint. Let's look at this passage here. I could spend hours telling you about the suffering the war has brought, but I'd only make myself more miserable. All we can do is wait, as calmly as possible, for it to end. Jews and Christians alike are waiting. The whole world is waiting, and many are waiting for death. All right, so for your checkpoint today, I want you to look at this highlighted sentence here. The highlighted sentence shows that Anne understands the disaster of the war, but she is trying to say blank. Is she trying to say A, positive, B, negative, or C, none of the above? What do you think? Make your response now. Okay, just pause if you need more time. All right, so that comes to the end of our guided reading, but let's just sum up what we just read, what we just interacted with. First, the Germans are gaining more control in Europe, and the world around Anne is beginning to crumble quicker and quicker. Then, number two, Mrs. Van Daan and Anne butt heads because of their personality, right? They don't get along. Mrs. Van Daan's more focused on material things, likes to argue for no really reason, which kind of shows that Anne is way more mature than Mrs. Van Daan. Number three, though Anne knows she will never be close with her mother, she realizes her relationship is getting better with her, right? Remember that one entry she says, my mother and I, we've been getting better, we've been getting along. Though we'll never be close, but we've been getting along, right? So there's a change in relationship there. Next, Anne gets a new roommate, Mr. Albert Dussel, a dentist that is also remaining and hiding in the annex. Remember, Albert Dussel is kind of quiet, we're fine, and he's living with Anne, so you know there's going to be a little bit of tension there. And, oops, that should say 5, I apologize. Finally, nature impacts Anne's life while living in the annex. Something as small as light can affect her mood negatively. But Anne is sure to find a way to remain positive about her situation, right? So Anne, while living, the nature affects her. Even though she's not really involved in nature, she still has a